This video will serve as an introduction to the section Information Security and Quality Assurance on FreeCodeCamp. This section I'll be doing in English. I've been doing the previous ones in Swedish for language purposes, but I've seen that there are actually quite a few, if any, videos about this section on YouTube, so I figured that it's a good idea to actually make these in English. Anyway, I haven't really felt that need for the other ones because there are so many videos about these sections out on YouTube anyway in English, so I figured I'd do them in Swedish. Anyway, this section will include a lot of different libraries, I guess, such as MongoDB, which we've used before in the previous section. We're going to use Express, which we also used before. We're going to use Node. We're going to use Node a bit more than we used in the previous section. We kind of had Node, but we didn't use it a lot, really. And we're going to use something called Chai and Mocha, which we've touched in the section as well, which we're touching in the section, but which we're going to use a lot more in the projects. So the section is called Introduction. It's called Information Security and Quality Assurance, which it's mostly the latter. We're touching a bit on information security. We're not doing a lot with it, and basically what we're doing is that we're using the library Helmet to do things, which is useful. Obviously, we're learning about it, but we're not doing a lot with it, so it's not amazingly useful, if you put it like that. We're going to do more about the quality assurance, but not really what quality assurance is in the real world, because QA is usually something else. But what it means in this section is that we're going to do testing. We're not going to use tests that FreeCodeCamp has written for us. We're going to do tests ourselves. We're going to write our own tests. And we're going to do that using Chai and Mocha. So Helmet we're using through Express. It's supposed to teach us about thinking about security. It's something that I think is a bit unnecessary in this course, because it's something that when you enter the workforce, you're probably not going to be the one thinking about that. But it's nice to know, obviously, and we're doing it in such an easy way that it doesn't take a lot of time or effort to learn about. You basically just installing Helmet, going to their API and looking at what you can use, and then you're using that. You're not doing anything special, you're not doing any quirks or anything. You're using Helmet, period. That's it. And it works as such a crash course, pretty much. It also serves as a bit of an introduction to how a third part is installed, because this is how it works in the real world. You don't write everything from scratch. Sometimes, or quite often even, you get the library that someone has written already, and you just install that in your app and you use parts of it. And that's actually what we do with Helmet. So that we're using that in a useful way, rather than using the security part of it or learning about that. We're actually learning something more useful through learning about Helmet, which is using a third-party library. So it's good. We're also learning about quality assurance, and as I said, it's not really what it's called in the real world. Quality assurance in the real world usually means it's a specific role, and it's usually not developers who do that. But we're part of it, obviously. We want to make apps that are good, useful, quality assured, and so on. They're working. And in that comes testing, and there are many different forms of testing. We have unit testing, we have functional testing, we have end-to-end testing, and we have manual testing. And so far, we have actually used unit testing really through FreeCodeCamp tests. But we've also used manual testing, because that's what you do every time you write an application with code. You manually test that it works. And you can do that in simple ways, just checking that this div is actually getting rendered to the screen. Or you can do it in more complicated ways and checking that a whole process of logging in and buying something works, and you do that through manual testing. You can, however, replace that with end-to-end testing, which is using a library such as Cypress, for instance, to go through for a lot of steps, such as logging into an app, finding a project, buying that product, making the purchase. All of that is one chain of events that you can test with end-to-end testing. We're not going to do that. We could, but we're not going to do that in this section. What we're going to focus on is mostly unit testing. We're going to write our own unit tests, and we're going to write some functional tests. And what's the difference there? Well, a unit test, in its essence, there's a gray zone here really, and people use these interchangeably, but a unit test is a test that tests the functionality of a specific part of the code, an isolated functional part basically, while a functional test tests the integration between several functional parts of the code. So there is a difference there. It's not that important to know, but it's good to know, because when you're thinking about writing your tests in the future, you can understand why you would write a unit test or a functional test. And to do these tests, you have several different libraries you can choose from. And we're going to use Chai and Mocha in this, which I don't really like. I don't think that reflects the industry, but we're going to use that, and no matter really, because Chai and Mocha are testing libraries, just like any other testing library. You still think the same way, you still write the tests in pretty much the same way, but you're probably not going to use Chai and Mocha in the real world, I think. Instead, you have things like Jest, and Jest is a much more standardized testing library, which is recommended by Facebook, for instance. And through Jest, if you go to the React route, you're going to use React testing library as well, probably, or Enzyme, which is mostly getting replaced by React testing library because it's easier to get into and such, and somewhat more useful, I think. But if you go the Angular route, you're probably going to use Jasmine instead. So it depends on which route you're going for later on. It doesn't really matter what we use though. I think Jest is better, it's easier to get into, and Chai and Mocha has some negatives with it, I think, because it's more difficult to get into than Jest. Anyway, that's what we're going to use. And we're going to use advanced node, and this part, in my opinion, is useless. And that's specifically for the part of the section that's called advanced node, because I think this part is bad, really. It's not that bad that we're learning about advanced node, obviously not, but it's unnecessary because we're going to cover so much during the project. This part itself is not connected to the project in any way. You don't need to do this part to understand the projects, or do the projects. You can just skip it, which I actually did half of it. And on the other hand, it's good to learn about login and authentication and stuff. That's useful stuff, but probably not in this section, because we're not going to use it in the projects. So why learn about it here? Why spend time on it when you can spend time on something else? And one thing that makes me really negative about this part is that it's really badly tested. The instructions for this part of the course do not actually cover the whole course. They do not work. You cannot use the instructions to do the course. You have to figure out stuff on your own, which I come from an educational background. I think this is really bad. When you're learning something new, you should be handheld, pretty much. You should have your hand held in such a way that you could easily go through the steps to learn what to do. You should not have to overcome the obstacle of figuring out what part of the instructions that are actually wrong, so that you could do the course. In my opinion, you should just skip this. Don't do the advanced node part, because it's bad. It's not thorough, it's not tested. Someone has just done this once, and published it, and that's not good. It's not fitting for FreeCodeCamp in my opinion. And again, it's too case specific for this stage of FreeCodeCamp. We're building specifically a login form with authentication, and that's not connected to the projects we're gonna make. And as this is the 6th section, we've done a lot of projects already, and anything we learn in the course should pretty much be connected to the projects, otherwise they're redundant. We don't need to do them. We could just finish FreeCodeCamp and start doing our own things then, such as building something with a login form. So the projects. These projects are really good in my opinion. They cover pretty much everything we've learned. We could obviously incorporate such things as React to it, but we're not going to do that. The focus is more on the backend. But 4 out of 5 projects require a database. The first project is not going to require a database. It's going to be a bit of a step back from the exercise tracker in the last section. But we're going to use MongoDB, like we've done before. And that's a good database, really. So we're going to use MongoDB for 4 out of 5 projects. We're gonna do some semi-advanced stuff with it. We're not going to do something extremely advanced, but we're going to work with it. These projects, unlike the ones in the last section, are going to be time-consuming. While the last section is probably not those 200 hours they talk about, or they estimate, this one might actually be more than 200 because of the time the projects take to do. Because unlike any of the other projects we've done in FreeCodeCamp, these projects are not just about figuring out how to solve the problem, which is going to be a bit different. We're going to solve the problem, obviously. We're going to solve the problem of how to solve how to build a project, really. That's the problem we're going to solve. But we're also going to solve the problem of how to write tests to make sure this project works. And that's something we haven't done before. It's very different, and it takes another way of thinking than we're used to, and that makes it time consuming. And test-driven development, TDD, is meant to be used. It's quite obvious when you're doing the project that it's meant to be TDD focused, but it doesn't work in practice. And the reason for that is because someone else has thought about which tests you should write and prepared those tests and thought about what way you should write the code. But if you're not writing the code in the same way that that person has thought about, then it doesn't work. So in my opinion, you shouldn't really do the TDD practice here. It's better to write the code first, go back to the test, write the test, and then go back to the code and fix what's not working, which is another way of writing tests. In my opinion, it's a better way of writing tests, but that's very opinionated in the industry, whether you write the test before or after. Because of that, the first project I did, I bypassed some tests. So I can't really do all the 16 ones because some of them are the code never gets there really. So I've only done 13 out of 16, and in my opinion, it doesn't matter because what matters is that you test your app, it works, and you can be sure that it works because you have your unit tests in place. And then you have a part which I think it's a bit weird. We have controllers in these projects, and there is no explanation of what they are. If you don't know what the controller in programming is, there's no way you're gonna figure it out through the section either, because they don't explain what it is. They just have it in the code. As if you pull down any of the repos, you can see that there is a folder named controllers, and then there's a file in there, or several files perhaps. And what are they for? Well, they are actually there to structure your code. That's what they're for. controllers are used in the real world. You use it a lot in clean code. But as a learner, someone who's learning code, you probably need an explanation of what it is and how to use controllers to be able to use them in these projects, which is not explained. So that's a bit weird. They are good though, and you should learn how to use controllers, and just Google it really. There are explanations online on how to write code with controllers. I will say though that I don't think there's a huge upside of using these controllers until you get to like the last project, because the code you write, one reason you would use a controller here is to get the code out of the server.js file and place it somewhere else to get less code in the server.js file that doesn't really belong there. But when you have one API endpoint, it doesn't really matter if you have it in the server.js file or somewhere else. It doesn't clutter the code or stuff, so you don't really need these. In the last project we're gonna make though, it's gonna be a few videos before we're there, but in that project we're gonna need controllers because there are so many different paths that we're gonna have to cover. I have a huge minus with this section as well, and that's the use of Ajax that we have. That is asynchronous JavaScript, and that's because we touched it a bit in the last section. We didn't really use it a lot, and in all of these projects, Ajax is used to handle the form submission, and because it's not explained, it's sort of difficult to understand what's happening between you submitting anything to the form and your code actually getting to work. So I would advise that you have a look at Ajax yourself before starting the project, just to understand what is happening when you write your code. You don't actually have to write Ajax yourself because they've already done that, but it's good if you actually understand what's happening. So that's the negative with this course in my opinion, because this would be needed. It would be good if they explain why it works, even though we don't really need to write Ajax ourselves. And really, if you would need to write Ajax the way they're doing it here, you could just Google it because it's very straightforward. It's not a complicated process, you just need to understand what they're doing to understand why your own code is working. So, that's going to be the introduction to this course. It got a bit long. I think it's necessary that it's long because there are a lot of things to think about here, and there's a lot of things we need to understand behind the scenes to do these projects in a meaningful way. So let's end it there. See you in the next video, where we're gonna build the first project in this section. Bye!